What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Inside the Numbers, the Rock Daisy Sports Performance Podcast. And today we have on guest Coach Stephanie Grubbs. She is the Assistant AD for Sports Performance at the University of Pittsburgh, and she oversees all of sports performance from top to bottom in an administrative role at Pittsburgh. And her position is unique because she is now seeing things from a administrative view, in budget meetings, in visionary meetings, seeing things from a really high level and getting more of a 50,000-foot view of how to set everything up for success. She's had a lot of success setting up sports science departments, with previous stops at Clemson and Mississippi State. And she gives some insights on how a sports science department with resources and manpower can have a lot of success and where there's a lot of downfalls. I know a coach like me can take some tidbits from this episode of just pulling in some things here and there of what make a sports science department go well. She also hits on her dual role as still the head strength coach for the number one in the country Pitt Volleyball team. So she sees it from both sides, and we can get a lot of value from that. She also touches on her value of using microdosing with the volleyball team to overcome the challenges with their game schedule and travel challenges as well. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode, and we'll see you on the inside. Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the Rock Daisy Sports Performance Podcast with your host, Coach Cody Hughes. Join us to unlock the secrets behind athletic performance as we break down the metrics and transform your collected data into powerful, actionable insights. Tune in for exclusive interviews with top coaches and professionals who are revolutionizing their training programs with data. If you love what you hear, please share it on X, Instagram, and YouTube, and tag us at RockDaisyAMS. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the show. Today I have on Coach Stephanie Grubbs now. It's not Stephanie Mock. I guess it is Stephanie Mock Grubbs, but congrats on recently getting married, Coach. Now everybody knows you as Coach Grubbs.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And luckily, my other half is also a coach. So, we're just a team doing the dang thing. But thanks so much, Cody.
For sure, yeah. If you guys don't know Stephanie, you should just look at a lot of other podcasts. She's been speaking all over the place and is one of the top administrators in our field, which I think is really cool to see someone who went from strength coach to admin who sees things from the top down. And what your bread and butter is sports science. And just from somebody like me who's a total tech nerd, I just want to talk about what the basics of what you think a sports science department really is. You know what I'm saying? So of what people may have misconceptions of what sports science role is in strength conditioning. Because I feel like it seems like it's just now coming onto the scene as like an official thing. Because for the longest time, strength coaches were kind of doing the thing and still are, of sports science. I don't really know how we make that simpler for people to understand. So if you were to explain, this is what my sports science team does at Pitt, what would you say?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not like a cookie cutter approach, like the field, at least in the States, is very new. And we even are looking at just across the Power Four schools, like what does the staff infrastructure look like? Like who all has like a full-time director of sports science? And then beyond that, like how many full-time positions do you have? And our infrastructure at Pitt is Zach Witherspoon, he's our director of sports science. I'm over strength conditioning and sports science at Pitt. So we call that kind of sports performance. So we have a unique setup because we have our director of sports science for athletics being Zach Witherspoon. And then we also have our director of sports science for academia that's over our sports science master's program. It's a 1-year program, and we just hired that role. It was pretty cool because I was a part of the search. So that was kind of my first associate professor role that I was a part of helping hire. And I'm super lucky that I was kind of integrated in with the School of Rehab Sciences at Pitt. But we just hired Dr. Tim Suckamel.
Yeah.
So he's a pretty sharp guy, and I actually got to spend some time with him over at the ASCA. We both spoke in Australia and talk about sports science. Like that's the mecca, and just overseas where it started. So we
and I see
have that unique setup for sure.
Dr. Suckamel is known for, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm totally going off the brain here. Is he known for like really diving into the science of accentuated eccentrics? I don't know if that's like his bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean
obviously he's done a lot of things,
but yeah, he's done a really good job of going across the country and kind of speaking on that for sure. And he comes from the ETSU tree. So we all know that's just a great spot to do your PhD. John Waggle came out of there, clearly Tim. So we're really lucky to have him on the academic side of the house, and he oversees all of our sports science master's students. Wow. So we have let's say 10 to 12 integrated just with all of our Pitt sports teams. And that's a 1-year program. And he's overseeing that alongside Zach. But all their practical experiences in the weight room with me. Like I have my own sports science master's student with volleyball, and they're helping with all the testing, data collection, sending out reports as they kind of build momentum with us and all that. So
good. So hey, that shows there that manpower is an absolute must to do if you want to do it at an actual high level, right? You have to have manpower. So knowing like you've got grad students, you've got GAs, you've got whoever's on your staff. So I want to talk about it from like the ground up. Let's just pick a topic. So like data collection in and of itself. That seems so tedious. And the reason why I ask is because as like a guy who did it at the high school level as a one-man show, and now I do have a staff, there's a lot of different ways to do it as far as because technology can be extremely great, but it also can be so annoying because you could live and die by it. So do you guys collect data both like manually? Do you have, auto collection and cloud collection? Can we talk about how you guys collect data and things you guys see as important to collect?
Yeah, I'd say some of our biggest pieces of technology that we're collecting on a day-to-day basis across all 19 sports is going to be like we use the Hawk and Force plates. And it's really nice because we have a lot of the different pieces of technology and all the different weight rooms are consistent. So it's not like we have, let's say, 4 stacks in one weight room, Hawking in another, and let's say another type in another space. So consistency across all 3 spaces is super helpful. And then even we can kind of go back and do some comparisons with like, let's say some injury data with return to play and things like that. So data collection is mainly cloud-based through Vault, through
Nice.
Hawken. Those are a couple of our big pieces, GymAware as well. And again, those are all consistent in all 3 spaces. So it makes it pretty easy. And data collection, I think a lot of the time is sometimes we do have a great resource on campus, the Neuromuscular Research Lab. And there's a lot of different pieces of technology in there, and they'll run class out of there for the sports science master's students as well. But a lot of different great pieces of technology is the pieces that you can actually take out to the court or the field. So we utilize 1080 Sprint as well in that regard. And I think for us, like sports science touches in some way, shape, or form all 19 sports at Pitt, but it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think that's super important to think about when you're building out your sports science department at your university, because some of your biggest users, let's say like our team that did it really, really well from the beginning of times was men's soccer. But historically overseas, there's a lot of research and data in that space. But let's say we're bringing along like a wrestling or a track and field, and maybe you have one team just utilizing 1 piece of technology, another team using 4 pieces of technology. But it's really, we drive utilization of technology around just problem solving, and finding solutions for different problems we may see across the different sports, whether it is a reoccurrence of an injury or just trying to collect data around some positional norms and things like that.
So you've done this at a few levels now. I mean, obviously you were the director of Olympic sports at Mississippi State, and I feel like it's kind of like you hear about head coaches coming in and rebuilding programs. Like you got a coach that's really good at taking a new stop and rebuilding it. It's almost like you're really good at stepping into a place, and now you would know you have some systems in place. All right, if I had a sports science program, I had 90 days to build it. Like I want to hear like those first 90 days of like what things you would put in place, and maybe let's do it from 2 perspectives, if you don't mind. I'm gonna challenge you a little bit here. Let's do it from a unlimited resource standpoint. All right, money's not a problem. What would we do? And then I have barely any resources. Let's say I've got, a low budget where I could get just a couple things in place, not no budget, but just some money in those first 90 days. Because I know there's a lot of coaches that want to do this. That's why I'm kind of setting this up as like a framework for a coach maybe to hear this and go, okay, I think I might be able to take that framework and try to use that and start something. So kind of 2 perspectives here. Very, very beginning where you would start. Let's start with the unlimited side. Let's start with hey, I'm at a place with basically whatever resource I want.
Yeah, and I think, Cody, it really starts, step 1 is like when I was the assistant director at Clemson, I had a really good mentor, Rick Franzblau, that he took me under his wing, kind of leading into my first director role he included me in a lot of the administrative meetings from the get-go. So finding a really good mentor that's going to help you go into budget meetings and know how to plan that out from an equipment standpoint, sports science standpoint, staffing standpoint, like GAs, continuing ed, all that. But having a mentor that you don't have to like say anything in the meeting, but you're going there, you're in the meeting, you're learning behind the scenes. So whenever you're the person in that seat, you've already been in that meeting, you know what questions to ask, you know how to carry yourself like a professional and things like that. So I think it started when I was an assistant director and really having a good mentor to include you and get you prepared for that next step, you know, because that's half the battle.
Got it.
And then when I went on my interview at Mississippi State for the director role, a lot of the time for a lot of these director positions, you're getting put into situations where it's a lot of like roundtable discussions. So at my interview for Mississippi State and for Pitt, there was like a head coaches roundtable, and you're going in and you're sitting in front of, whether at Pitt, it was all of our head coaches across the whole entire athletics department. Mississippi State, it was just kind of like, because it was in the summertime, it was whoever could make it at that time with recruiting and things like that. But what I took was just a master playbook. I took like 2 or 3 copies of it to really show like, hey, this is how I go about working with sports medicine. This is how I go about working with nutrition. This is how I would kind of really split up responsibilities with my full-time staff, with my graduate assistants, primary, secondary, additional team responsibilities, testing and assessment I plan on doing, and kind of how I would shake that out between field sports, rotational sports, jumping sports, things like that. But I think coming in with a plan on your interview so you can show like, hey, when I do get the position, my first 90 days, I already showed you what I was going to do. I think sometimes people wait too long. They wait to get the position and then they start thinking like, oh, I better have a plan. Like I got to figure that out, plus pack all my boxes, plus figure out what resources I have there. And I think to your point, both of my positions that I've taken have been super lucky, like working in the SEC and now the ACC. That was part of me figuring out a pros and cons list of like, should I take this position? Am I going to be financially supported? Not only like clearly for myself, but what's my budget? You know, whenever I take over at a Mississippi State or a Pitt, those are questions you need to be asking on your interview, because the last thing you want to do is, hey, I'm going and taking this position. Every director in this position prior to me has like gotten out of the field from burnout, or hopefully it's the opposite, like they've projected in a bigger, badder position. So I think as S&C practitioners or sports performance, sports science, you should be asking a lot of these questions along the way. And then that sets you up for when you do get the position. I think one thing that I learned from my first head job to my second head job is my first head job, I was like, man, I'm Stephanie Mock. I want to go in, make my massive impact, like take over the world, be the best director out there, because that was always my end goal professionally. And I learned that going into my second head position, being here at Pitt in more of an administrative role, I've taken a lot more time in my first 60 days to just figure out what is going on just on the ground level, like talking with everyone in athletic training, everyone in nutrition, all the sport administrators that are overseeing all the different teams, talk with all the different head sport coaches. Like, what do you like about your strength coach? Has your strength coach traveled in the past? Do you have a conditioning test? When do you usually lift? But just making sure I'm going in and talking with everyone before I just start establishing and putting my systems into place. Because I think you really need to vet out. Because a lot of the time there's great things going on there, you know, so why do you feel like you need to just trash everything? I think that's where I probably went wrong my first time around, of like, I must come in and change everything because this is what I want to do. And you always have to give credit to the leader before you in that position and what they did really well. So that's just a little bit behind the scenes.
I can relate to that too, on the strength coach level, going to meet their head coach, because that's kind of what that sounds like to me is when you first go in, like you want to kind of take the temperature of the place and figure out, you know, they could be doing some really good things, but could it come off as, because what I'm also hearing is that some coaches may get really burned out, but it's almost like they did it to themselves. I hate to say that, coaches, but if you come in and either overpromise and you didn't ask good enough questions to know if you even had the resources to deliver on that promise in the first place. Right. So then people are like, oh, you know, and then all of a sudden you want to complain that I can't get this job done when you promised it, when maybe the commitment wasn't there in the first place. Maybe you didn't ask good enough questions on the interview to know if you even had those resources. Do you think coaches set themselves up for failure sometimes doing that, or coming in hot, you know, guns a-blazing and, hey, my way or the highway, and just ruin relationships?
Yeah, I think because we're talking about sports science a lot, sports science, knowing the state of the state, like that was something that myself and our first director of sports science, Dr. Felix Prosel, did a great job kind of like helping me get sports science just off the ground here at Pitt. We knew going in, let's under promise and over deliver, right? Let's let them know, like, hey, this is our mission, our vision, our values within the sports science department. This is what we're capable of doing. This is our staff infrastructure, just so you know, like technically Felix is the only full-time staff member with all these master students at that time helping out. But yeah, we made sure to under promise and then over deliver. And then that really set us up for, as I brought on Zach and now we have Tim, it's like, hey, they know what sports science is. We know the mission, we know the vision. We kind of understand every team and how they're using sports science. But now how can we better utilize all of this information for decision making? Because we've done the data collection piece to your point. But now I think just making decisions on the back end now that we have enough historical data to do that. So I think especially when you're building out your sports science department, if you only have one full-time position, be aware, really live off that under promise, over deliver, and then that will set you up for success versus saying like, I can do everything for every team, all 19 sports. It's like, you should probably kind of tier it out in some way, shape, or form and really start to, as you come in and take over a program, it's really important to go in and be like, hey, these are some observations that I've made. This is what I've picked up on. Am I reading the room correctly? It's not I'm coming in and saying like, you must do this at practice. You must cut these 3 drills out at the end of practice or never do this drill again because it drives up IMAs on Catapult or whatever else. I think just going in, especially early on to build trust and frame everything as observations will really pay dividends on the back end.
Yeah, no doubt. So I think the biggest mistake I made was thinking that as soon as I got some resources to collect data of any kind, I'm talking as easy as collecting body weight consistently, because some people don't even do that, or you're collecting sprint times or jumps, which is very base level sports science, right? That's like the bottom of the pyramid, is thinking you're going to make decisions quickly off of a very small data set.
Yeah.
Can you speak on that a little bit? Like if you're mentoring a young sports scientist, or when do you start thinking about making any kind of decision?
Yeah, I think whenever I'm mentoring, like I think about my current sports science master's student, just educating him on within the performance team, everyone's roles and responsibilities, and time of year is so important, right? Like you don't need to be sending your head coach a daily report in season for Catapult, Hawken, Gym Aware. You really have to create some type of filter system of priority responsibilities. Who needs this information? Who needs it quickly? So we try to split it up. We have our performance team, dashboard, and then we have like our sport coach dashboard. And we're sending out, because the head sport coach is worrying about recruiting, he's worrying about getting ready for game day, going through film, interviews for them, whatever talk show they're on that week.
Right.
So I think filtering out the important data, like the KPIs for your performance team, so your AD, your dietitian, sports scientist, S&C, what does that look like for that group? And then how frequently am I in touching base with our head sport coach or just your sport coach staff? I think that's like step one. And just really figuring out what the expectation is from the head sport coach. Maybe that sport coach does want like a report every single day on wellness. How are they sleeping? How many meals do they eat? Things like that. But I think, having that first meeting with the sport coach to figure out what are expectations, what do you want to see consistently? What do you want to see once a week? What do you want to see once a month? But I think a lot of the time, sports scientists, they'll be like, or young practitioners, they'll be like, I want to have a direct impact right now, so I'm going to send them everything. And it's like, whoa. Like this guy's just blowing up my inbox, and now I'm not looking at any of the reports. And I don't think your position is important at all. So just figuring out, building that relationship on the front end, figuring out expectations, and then kind of delivering on the variables that the sport coach wants to see in a timely manner for sure.
Yeah, good points. So I want to dig down a little bit and get detailed on one thing. And one thing you mentioned to me was something that's interesting you is the utilization of force plates. I'm starting to see force plates trickle down all the way to the high school level. Like I have force plates at the high school level, and a lot of other high schools have them. 10 years ago, you would have laughed at that. You're like, there's no way, right? There's just from the barrier of entry and the cost, and even being at the Sportsmith Speed Conference at Pitt this summer, and like watching Alex Natera work, which was unbelievable. Somebody who's knows more about force plates than maybe anybody, is that it can seem overwhelming, and I want to hear how, because like force plate utilization seems to be extremely cloudy. Me included. Like I literally have a call with Vald later today because I need help. Like I have them, I have the resources to use them. I feel like I know a little bit about them, but it's overwhelming me. So like if I was to try to take the most value out of a force plate, I mean, obviously the first thing I can think of is like, okay, can you get a jump on everybody and then take from there? How do you guys utilize the force plate? Like how is it valuable in your day-to-day? Because it sounds really cool. The metrics sound cool. You see a modified RSI, you see time to peak, you see peak power, jump height with really accurate, like impulse momentum data. All that sounds cool and all, but I want to know how it's moving the needle.
Yeah, definitely. Force plates are great because it's the one piece of technology that you see utilized from the high school level to the college level, to the pro level. So from like a data sharing standpoint of norms, positioning, like I was talking about, there's a lot of information out there of like let's say a basketball or volleyball team, like, hey, for an outside hitter, if you're jumping over 20 inches, like that's positionally a norm. So like if you're jumping that in high school, recruitable age and things like that would be a great trajectory. But I think
cool.
If you're talking with, let's say, like your head sport coach, they're probably going to care about system weight, body weight, and then also jump height for like a basketball or a volleyball, that's just going to be normal. When you're talking with the performance team, like I know that's the one great thing about force plates is they can kind of connect with your PTs, your ATs, your sport coaches, clearly S&C, sport science, and everyone's going to utilize it in a different way. So like from a strength coach standpoint, depending on what training block you're in, if you're truly doing like a triphasic training block or some of these isometrics, and you have a special case with maybe two athletes that you want to get on the force plates and actually do some of these like iso mid thigh pulls, some of their like positional specific isos for a track and field athlete. It's great to use in training, to get feedback on, am I eliciting the response that I want to in that training block from an S&C standpoint? When you flip it to like a PT or an AT, maybe you have an athlete coming back from an ACL and you want live feedback from like a squatting pattern of, hey, you're running it live and you're squatting up and down and you're showing the athlete that feedback right away to see, hey, am I shifting away from my ACL side? Am I imbalanced? So I think we've found a lot of buy-in, even with some of our medical staff, to want to kind of utilize them more and actually get them up in the weight room during training sessions more. So I think that's another great attribute of the force plates is it kind of connects a lot of the dots between the performance team members too. And then with the body weight, like I know nowadays, just you're not going to get kids on a scale a lot of the time, just with some of the body image stuff and things like that. But you can, like I said, for the performance team, kind of shift system weight towards especially male, female athletes, because we're seeing both in my space. You can kind of report on that and weekly undulations and percentage and hydration for outdoor sports. So force plates kind of connect all the dots for the performance team and also the coaching staff. So versus some of these others, like a gym aware, clearly that's going to connect well with an S&C coach from a training block standpoint, but the head sport coach isn't going to care as much, or your dietitian. So sure. I think the marriage between all the performance areas with the force plates and that connection is fantastic for sure.
I think what really bothers me, because I feel like I'm just an overanalyzer, so talk me off the cliff here, is we're not, as sports scientists, I guess, and strength coaches specifically, like we're not in a lab and can't control variables or account for them because we know that the sports season is chaotic. And to me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get readings on a force plate. And I do want to see if my adaptations are increasing, because it does make sense to use force plates as a much higher valid tool to validate that, other than what the traditional S&C, hey, increase in performance KPIs such as increase maxes, because that's still number one in the high school level. Like, did their squat go up? Did their bench go up? Or did their vert go up on a jump mat? No, did their sprint go up on their lasers if they have them? So now you can look a little bit deeper, but part of me thinks like, okay, when you look at the turnover of, all right, I got one kid that's got to step on the force plate, zero it out, weigh it, get your jumps, make sure it reads, get off, next guy. Because I mean, even if you have Hawken or Vald, it still takes some patience with these pieces of technology. It's not, there's always going to be something that has to be managed. It's not going to work perfect every time and still needs to be coached. But let's say like I've got a group of 30 kids and we're training and we're trying to get it in training. But I'm trying to get counter movement jumps. Maybe I get some in block A. And then some kids I get towards the end, but they've already done like a pretty decent volume squat session. But I'm trying to look at adaptations over time. I'm over here going, well, isn't that data skewed? Because some kids might be fatigued or some kids might be fresh. So and then I just tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, just like, I don't even think this is worth it. Like, am I overthinking that?
Yeah, we do try to consistently do a few different pieces, right? So we usually jump all of our teams once a week, and a lot of time it's happening after their off day. And so if we have ACC play, we play Friday, Sunday, Monday's our off day, we're jumping on Tuesday. And we do have, depending on the sport, like some teams are coming directly from practice, like a lacrosse. So they've already practiced for 2.5 hours, and then they're coming in to jump on the force plates. That's usually consistent, though. They're always coming from practice and jumping. But we do have like a no practice warm up for the force plates, like no practice, like pre-jump. And then we do have a jump warm up for if you do have practice. So those are solidified and locked in and standardized. And then even the language that we use when the athletes are jumping, and that's across the board for all of our teams. So jump as high and as fast as you can, right? And that's kind of like literally plastered in front of the force plates because we have 2 sets, say, in the Olympic weight room. But we try to keep that consistent. The warm up, whether you're coming from practice or not, and then also the language you're using when they're jumping. But yeah, it can be tough, right? Because like if a coach gets mad and we're usually lifting at 2 o'clock and all of a sudden we're lifting at 7 a.m. every day, like, okay, if I'm always jump testing them in the afternoon and all of a sudden we change to a morning lift, maybe we have some ladies that don't jump too well at 7 a.m. versus 2 p.m. So I think just, yeah, there's a lot of things to take into consideration, and that's important. Like what I'll do is if we do make some massive change, or if we did have like during preseason, if you have a couple 2-a-days in the mix, or you're playing 3 games a week, like take these things into consideration. Then I'll put like notables within the report. And then you usually have like that, and then also your return to play kids, and then your starters, non-starters, and things like that. So yeah, just making sure you're kind of laying out all that information in the report. And that just comes with time, right? Like sometimes our sports science master students wouldn't think of that to include that in the report. And then the sport coach is like, why does everyone's jumps look like dog doo-doo this week? Like, hey, and then they'll be like racking their brain. It's like, hey, make sure you're including these things. So anytime we send a report, it's usually getting proofread by a full-time coach. And it's a great like conversation starter between you and that master's student of, this is what I've learned throughout my time. I didn't know this until I got 5 years into the profession. And so I think that's why mentorship, again, goes back to is so important.
That makes sense. I know that I've seen that from an interesting, I'll give you kind of an interesting point from my point of view on like performance from time of day. So two examples. One, just yesterday, we're getting tons of jumps, and we're using there's a new laser jump system called OVR Performance. You may have seen it or not.
Yeah.
Very low barrier to entry, basically a better jump mat. So it's just quicker jumps, and we're jumping like crazy. So I had a basketball lift yesterday morning, and we always jump before any lift anyway and track the numbers. But we had class that same day because my athletes both train in class and out of class. It's a hybrid model. But every time we train, we jump anyway. So like yesterday, so they basically had a 2-a-day. So they would train as a team in the morning and then come back in class and train again. Well, for those basketball guys, I had something different, but we still jump. Like everybody jumps. And he went from having like terrible jumps in the morning, trained, had about a 4-hour break, came back, and then set a PR. Very interesting, with the nervous system, being ready based off of circadian rhythm or a lot of different things, maybe had some food in his system. So that's something to think about, which I thought was very interesting. The more interesting thing that I saw, and you may be able to cater to this as a different perspective from college athletes, I always thought as a strength coach that I've been hammered into my head, the kids are freshest at the beginning of the week. So you should do all of your high nervous system demand things at the beginning of the week. You're going to see high outputs, right? You're going to see fast sprints. They're recovered. They should be able to do all of those things well. I'm not seeing that at the high school level. I'm seeing my highest outputs on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And here's this is my thought, and this is just me. I think kids at the high school level are playing travel ball, and they're actually not recovered. And then when they get back into the week of a routine to school, it takes their body 48 hours. And then on Wednesday, they're typically like rolling. And then by the end of the week, they're probably gassed again. But those are also very more immature athletes. Do you guys see any kind of weird, like, hey, this is traditional SNC, this is what Charlie Francis said, so this is what must be true type thing, but at the college level, like, maybe based off, because now you've seen a lot of sports science data, a ton of it. You have in-house patterns and trends that like maybe that didn't necessarily go with what maybe we thought traditionally.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really, really interesting point of view because We do have a couple teams on campus that they'll jump every single day because maybe they take their plates and you see it all the time. Like they put them on the court for basketball, and they're jumping literally like every day, but maybe their off day, they're getting some type of recording. And you will see, and I think it's interesting too, when I look at male and female athletes, just from like a hormonal standpoint, like women, what I've seen, because I've worked with both, women handle volume really well, but they don't handle intensity a lot of the time very well. So I always see our girls, we're like volume beasts, so we may, to your point, like our hardest, longest practice is the furthest day out from game day. And like if we came back and jumped on Wednesday just from like our gym aware speeds and things like that, like a lot of the time our girls aren't as phased as maybe like a male team, because that intensity piece is what they handle really well. So I think sometimes taking that into consideration too, just really what you see with men and women, is something that I've kind of seen with just our massive athlete population. But I've even seen that with like the Vertec, right? Like I've seen teams like jump right at the beginning of practice, and I've seen teams do like the first two drills of practice, let's say a basketball team or volleyball team, and then they jump and they score extremely like way better,
Right.
or they jump at the beginning of practice and then they jump at the end of practice and they actually jump a lot higher at the end of practice. So I think there's a lot of things to take into consideration when you are doing testing. And I always think it's so interesting, like you'll see some, whether it's basketball or volleyball, like they'll take their plates on the road and they'll jump on game day, and just kind of seeing that response of like, I don't know, when you kind of layer in, one, it takes a long time to get all these athletes through, like to your point, we have two sets of plates, so it goes a little bit faster. But two, like if I know like one of my best athletes, she's usually hitting, let's say 21 inches consistently, and we jump on game day and she hits 18 for some reason, like I'm curious, like, are they showing that athlete the data, on game day, especially if it's a big game?
Sure.
Or is that just kind of internal collection and you're not showing your athlete? Because I do see I've seen a lot of people jumping people on game day. I'm like, oh man, like I don't know if I would do that personally. I would do it if I wouldn't show them the number, but our kids are super competitive, so they're gonna want to see what they got, at the end of the day.
Worried that some of this stuff that we're collecting is going to cripple some of our really high competitive kids because all they want to do is win. And they take it way too much, like take it to heart when things aren't great. Like for example, we've got a girls basketball player. She's our principal's daughter. She's the youngest of three of two college athletes. Her older sister's playing college basketball right now, and she just wants to be everything. She's got work ethic out the window, but she cripples herself because we're sprinting. We do a ton of 5-10 flies just because of our space. Like it's literally the only sprint we can do in our space consistently. And I had to explain to her the other day, like the difference between like she ran like a 15.3 miles per hour. And I'm going to do this on my phone because I don't know it off the top of my head. But as far as split times go, that's like 1.33. Okay, so a 1.33 on that's really good for a high school girl. Then all of a sudden she hits like a 14.7. And then from a miles per hour standpoint, she's all disappointed because she's like, that's so slow. I'm doing terrible. And I'm like, actually, that's a 1.39. That's 600ths of a second. You know how like your hand could clip the laser, if you're not lucky enough to have, smart speed or something that actually collects for center of mass like Asher. So it's just a straight single laser beam. So you could trip it. And all of a sudden the kid thinks I'm slow today. I suck today. Like how do you go about educating and partnering with the kids? Or the athletes. I mean, you're not really working with kids. I'm working with kids. But of like, remember, this is just how do you keep the kids like you're talking about and the athletes that are so competitive to not marry themselves to that data?
Yeah, I always kind of tell them it's like a flag-based system, right? If you just see one flag, like if we're doing force plates, gym aware, maybe jumping on the Vertec at practice, if you're collecting like 5 metrics a week and maybe one thing is off, like let's not worry about that. Let's not lose sleep over it. But if we see like force plates, Vertec, or jump mat, like you're saying, and then also like gym wears off, like, okay, that's 3 flags in 1 week. And maybe you had to go get extra treatment. Like maybe let's have a conversation. So I tell them like, let's not lose our mind over one thing. If one thing's off, let's see if there's a stacking of flags, then there's definitely concern. Because we do like wellness check-ins too. They still get a lot of bang for your buck. And our kids
do you do that with surveys? You survey the kids with wellness?
Yeah,
is how that works?
We'll fill it out every day, like every morning that's not game day, because we're not trying to add extra stress on them on game day. Like we want them to sleep as much as possible and eat well.
How are you distributing that?
Yeah, we distribute it through just our AMS system.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just through their app, and then they fill it out on there. And every team, depending upon what the head sport coach wants to see or the performance team, that's kind of how we pick the questions. But we just have the allotment thrown in there. Like we care about, we don't call it, because like to your point about kids stressing out, we don't call it stress. We call it challenge or
Oh,
threat,
cool.
And challenge is like good stress and threat is like bad stress. We don't like to like everyone uses stress so much and saying it makes you stressed out.
Hey,
So we
good
try
point.
to put it in those two different categories. Just we work with our sports psychologist on that. And like challenge is like, hey, yesterday's practice was very challenging. Like I was working on a new skill. It was really, really hard, but like that's good. I want to be challenged. Like my standard is high for myself. Like threat is going to be more of like someone in my family passed away, my boyfriend broke up with me, something like that. So my test, I failed it, and that I did not prepare well. So,
Right.
but like both are extremely important, but we kind of include that. We ask about sleep and like RPE of practice the day before, accruing lift as well.
Gotcha.
And then a body soreness mat, of course, is super helpful. Pain and soreness and kind of numbering that in. So
Sure
yeah,
thing.
no,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's all great. I feel like I guess at your level where you've got one, they're scholarship athletes, two, they're NIL athletes being paid. It's a lot easier to hold those kids accountable or those players. I say kids way too often because I deal with high
they
school
kind of
kids,
are
but
kids still though.
I get it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, they're probably still talking to mom and dad and they're not paying their own bills, but holding them accountable because that's a lot, especially it's like, hey, we've got this really robust sports science program or total sports performance program from across, however many, it sounds to me like you guys have 5 or 6 different integrated departments of asking them to do all of that. Is that something that an athlete typically just gets used to? Like, hey, we're asking you to fill out this wellness questionnaire. And do you feel sometimes you're just having to track kids down for compliance? Or at the end of the day, it's like, this is what it takes to be great.
Yeah. The one team that I work with right now, so how we handle it is we kind of empower the kids to have leadership, right? So we have like czars of the different areas. So like we have a check-in czar and it's one of the girls on the team. We have a catapult czar. She's in charge of collecting all the catapults, making sure everyone has their bras on the road. And things like that. We have a weight room czar for like plates, dumbbells, like they'll run the force
I
plate
like that.
warm up actually when they come in the weight room. So I think the more that, and like if somebody didn't fill out their check-in, I go to the check-in czar and I'm like, hey, get so and so to turn this in. And then they understand what we go through to keep like the wheel turning, right? So I think empowering and giving them like a leadership area. We have like other areas too, like social decisions are make sure you're making good social decisions outside of like training and practice and things like that. So
Oh,
I
okay. I
think
really
that's an
like
easy
that.
way,
Yeah,
yeah, to
that's
hold the
awesome.
kids accountable.
So do you still train volleyball? Are you on the floor with volleyball still?
Yeah, that's the only team. I oversee 19 sports, but that's the one team I still train personally.
But
And that's what I
still
played in
though,
college. So I probably have a love for it.
well, sure, and that makes sense. But it's also funny that you played at West Virginia and now you're an assistant AD at Pitt, which is
I know,
hilarious.
tough.
And hey, hail to Pitt for beating West Virginia this year. That was awesome.
Yeah.
What a great
Whoever
game that
pays my
was.
bills.
But seeing that, I'm just seeing this from a lens of how cool it is of you being in high level meetings and decision making, but you're still also on the floor. Like I think of it from like a high school standpoint. Like I couldn't imagine a principal being a principal and still teaching one class. Like being a teacher, like still being ground level. So does that also help with keeping you grounded? Because I can see where the higher up you go, it's really tough to keep. You got to be really skilled to keep tabs on what's happening on the floor to relate to your coaches that you're overseeing and also evaluating. Because I feel like there's a gap there of sometimes admin trying to evaluate a strength coach. Everybody in the industry says like you don't know how to evaluate what I do, but you're doing it. And you're that bridge piece. Does that make sense? Like, does that really help you stay grounded now that, hey, I'm right here with you guys. I'm training volleyball day to day. So I understand what you're going through.
Yeah. I know I just still love coaching a lot. So it's going to be hard for me to completely move away from coaching. I'm not too old yet. So I'm getting there. I'm crawling up. But I think it allows me to understand and like for all of my staff members, I always tell my whole entire staff, like, this is our program. This is our department. It's not just mine. Like all the bad things do fall on me. So I have to put those fires out. But like everyone has a percentage of the program, like 10%. So one of my full-time assistants, 5%. So one of the interns, like it's a shared team effort in that regard. But whenever I'm still coaching on the floor and have one team, like I couldn't have sadly like a track and field, right? That's like 75 to 90 athletes. I had track
Sure.
at Clemson. It's like 6 teams in one sport. It's crazy. Just like football when you have all these positional groups. Like, so I couldn't take on a team of that size and just that many training groups because it would take up too much time throughout the day. But volleyball was a manageable team. Because I did have wrestling at first when I got to Pitt, and they were great. Love wrestling to death. But like the weight classes and the red shirts and things like that, it's just like, yeah, if you have 3 training groups in one day,
Yeah.
and then I have all these meetings too. So I think being intelligent with the team that you're picking, that maybe, hey, it's one lift group a day. I don't have to be at the whole entire practice that day. Like a basketball's tough because you're expected to be at everything. So pick the right team, but also I think that you still have that respect for each other. You know, like my staff is seeing me on the floor coaching. I understand the problems that we're going through. Sport coaches, kind of how they're really coming to us and saying like, hey, I have this problem with the transfer portal. I'm not keeping student athletes from year 1 to year 4 anymore. You don't have that long-term athlete development. How are we changing our systems to fit and create solutions for what we're kind of walking into nowadays? And that the fact that I'm living it, because like if I stopped being a strength coach, let's say when I took this position 3 years ago, and I only had my S&C experience or sports science experience from 2018 and before, it'd be really hard for me to understand the infrastructure in the system and some of the problems that sports scientists and strength coaches are running into. You know,
Makes
like
sense.
these athletes, as we kind of see things growing, like it is turning into a little bit of a semi-pro model possibly in the future. So are these athletes going to have ownership of their data, you know, from a sports science standpoint? Are we going to be able to share that with like a sport coach, or is that going to be, we don't want them being held against them? So has that become some type of different data? Maybe we put a different data lake. I don't know, but these are some of the problems that we're seeing coming up. But if I wasn't actually in it, like right now, then I wouldn't understand that. So I think just me still being boots on the ground and kind of seeing some of these problems. And sometimes when I am sitting in these higher up meetings and we're throwing around ideas, like I understand like, hey, maybe getting wearable technology like an Oura Ring or a Whoop would be great, but like working with a team, like what if 5 of the girls lose their Oura Ring? I have an Oura Ring, but like what if they lose them? Are they going to sign some contract saying like, I'm going to buy back a new Oura Ring for the team? You know, like how are we going to handle? Because that's going to happen. But if you're not in it, like me still boots on the ground, you may not think of that. I might be like, oh, this sounds like sunshine and rainbows, but it's like to carry out some of these master plans may sound really, really good, like 10,000 foot view, but actually implementing it, and some of the people that are gonna have to do that, it could be massive headaches or it could be really great. But at least I can kind of bring those questions to the table because I'm still day in, day out doing it. So I think I enjoy it for sure.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's a tremendous perspective. And I really wish, you know, I think the field's moving that way, and seeing people like you and yourself in that position to be able to relay that information of like, hey, those perspectives are so valuable. But that you are still on the floor. Let's go back to your roots. You know, say you love coaching, right? So you're training volleyball, which is awesome. I cut my teeth in college strength conditioning with volleyball. So I love volleyball.
Let's go. Yes.
I actually when I was a GA, I roomed with the assistant volleyball coach who was a 2-time national men's champion, which was amazing.
Awesome.
So he taught me, oh my gosh, like he educated me so much on the game, and I fell in love with it, which was awesome. And you mentioned to me part of what you know, a topic you were really passionate about is microdosing strength training with like a court sport like volleyball. Can you talk me through your approach there?
Yeah, no, and it's funny you say about the men's game because our head coach is a male. We have 3 male coaches on our staff that all played the men's game. So it's interesting to kind of compare
different game, right?
Game, but
like,
that could be a whole other podcast.
Yeah, well, let's just hit on it for a second for those of you that don't know, because Rob was his name, and he like pulled up YouTube because he played with some Olympians. He played at Loyola Chicago, he was saying like, I played with this guy. This guy touched like 12 feet, and like the power game of the men's game, it's like it's not near as, I don't want to say less skilled, but power can overpower. There's just some balls you can't dig. I mean, it's just hit that hard. But with the women's game, it's extremely savvy. Like, it's just extremely savvy with the scheme and the spacing. So I know we can go back to the actual question, but I do appreciate that a lot. So
yeah, no, definitely. Like the men's serves, you're 100%. Like there's a higher error percentage of missed serves for sure, but like if that thing's going over, you're in trouble.
No chance. I mean, I even stood in on a college practice just to be there and one of the girls that jump serves, I stood in front and I was like, okay, I have a whole nother respect. I'm not getting in front of that. And that's a girl smashing a volleyball. Couldn't imagine standing in front of an Olympian male hitting it. Like, good gracious. It's insane.
Yeah. No, it's an impressive sport for sure. But yeah, whenever I got to Pitt, and I had heard about microdosing strength training a while back when I was at a conference in California. Ramsey put it on out with the Kings.
Yeah.
So I went out there and Corey Schlesinger had spoke when he was at Stanford working with men's basketball. And he actually, his presentation was great because it was a little more applied. Like he went over some slides and they actually had someone there to kind of take them through like an example lift that he would do. So as we all know, it's super helpful. Like when you go through a presentation, great. But when you see it on the applied side, you're like, man, could I pull this off in my space? You know, do I have the staff? Do I have the size facility? And is it close enough to the court? So I think seeing him go through it, an example of it, that got my wheels turning. And then as I got to Pitt, our head volleyball coach, he was already implementing microdosing with strength training with the prior strength coach. And I worked with volleyball for a very long period of time. So this was newer to me. I had like read up on it, heard about it, but I'd never been at a school where we had this set up to be able to pull it off. And I say that because a lot of people will call me and ask about it. And I'll be like, all right, hey, here's the pros and cons, you know, like if we had a weight room, like when I was at Mississippi State, our weight room was like over by the football facility across campus, like an 8-minute drive, you know, let's say to get from point A to point B. Like we could do microdosing, we could lift for 20 minutes before practice, but then they're going to get in their car, drive across campus, get cooled down, and then you're a little bit SOL and it defeats the purpose. So I think you got to think about facility, you know, where's the weight room relative to your court? And I know basketball usually has a pretty good setup in regards to their weight rooms like right off the court, or it's like weight room, training room with the locker room somewhere in there. So I think they usually have a pretty good setup. In our gym, literally the weight room's right above the volleyball gym. So like perfect setup for us to be able to pull it off. I also have like usually a sports science master student that's helping me out. He's CSCS, so that's super helpful. And then I have a S&C fellow because we do have like our older athletes that maybe are on some type of special strength piece. We have like our freshman athletes that are maybe more like developmental. And then we may have some return to play. So like having 3 strength coaches, because the lift goes extremely fast. Our lifts usually range from 15 to 30 minutes prior to practice. And pretty much I utilize that lifting period, like either you're down on the court warming your team up, right? So Cody, I'm sure you know, like you go down, you do activation, this, that, and the other, you do some stretches, that takes 10 to 15 minutes. I just try to be a little bit more strategic with that time with microdosing in regards to just giving them a specific type of stimulus just in the weight room, you know?
Yeah.
So we're about to start ACC play here coming soon. We play Friday, Sunday. Mondays are off days. So we'll lift Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then we'll lift Saturday. Usually our longest lift day is the furthest day out from game day. So like that Tuesday lift's like 25 to 30 minutes. Then it kind of
30-minute lift's your longest lift.
Yes.
But if you accumulate the numbers, but if you accumulate, because I'm starting to see, it's not always about how much time you spend in one lift, but if you look at it from a more of a, week to week. So if you're going like 25, 30 minutes, maybe, 10, 15 minutes, 15, 10, that right there, let's just make the numbers easy. 30, 15, 15, that's an hour. And then like another 25-minute lift. You're getting an hour and 30, say an hour and 30 minutes a week of lifting. That's just like doing 2 90-minute sessions. I mean, that's just like doing 2 45-minute sessions as far as like amount of work you're doing. But what's the benefit of doing it in in higher frequency rather than like, hey, let's just do 2 45-minute lifts if you have the setup, like you said?
Yeah, I would say kind of zooming out, maybe not so much X's and O's just yet, but we know our student athletes, a lot of the time when you're in season, lift is getting put after practice, right?
True.
So like,
and they're dreading it half the time. They're like, I have to go like, you ever heard of like, because I heard somebody say this the other day on a podcast. I don't mean to cut you off, but like you practice is like super detailed. We're getting things done. We're looking forward to practice, but then like you'll hear the verbiage of a coach like, all right, let's go get our lift in. We got to go check that box. So it's almost like a framework change. Yeah.
And I think with them coming into the weight room so much more frequently, it gives me a better relationship with student athletes, because if you're lifting like once or twice a week as a strength coach, you're only seeing them that many times, but it gives me a consistent eye on their readiness. I'm seeing maybe I have a freshman starting and like a super senior, a 6-year senior starting. How are they adapting to practice the game? So it gives me a more constant readiness level and read of maybe it's not sports science oriented, like jumping on the force plates, but like the coach's eye is still important. It's the art and science, right? So I think that's super helpful too. And just their ability to execute movements when you're having that higher frequency and exposure. And I'm only asking them to do, let's say, like 2 main movements and that's it. Or maybe we have 1 main movement plus some accessory work because they already have so much to focus on court, technically and tactically in season, getting ready for different opponents and things like that. When I'm asking for a little bit lesser of them each day, and we know kids' attention spans only getting worse with everything in the world, I'm asking them to just execute like 3 to 5 movements a day. I get a lot more out of them than being in there for like an hour or 45 minutes. So I think just from an in-season standpoint, I only utilize it in season. I don't do it all year round. But our layout usually looks like Monday's that recovery day, or if somebody doesn't play, maybe it's like a top-up type day for some of those kids. Tuesday's more of a strength day. So we usually do like our higher force movement, so like a heavier power clean. And then also we do a squat, and then usually our Nordics are on that day, just from a soreness standpoint. Wednesday's more of our like power and accessory type day. And it's still like 20 to 25 minutes, right? So we usually do like our trap bar deadlift on that day, more concentric work, and then like some type of unilateral work on that day too. Thursday turns more into like a speed type day. And sometimes this lift is done on the road, right? Because we're traveling. So for example, we're going to an ACC school this week. We'll leave on Thursday, lift at that school, play on Friday. So we'll do like more of a loaded jump, like a trap bar jump and some net ball slam. So that's definitely, it's nice because like we get off the plane, it gives them, the first thing we're doing is like getting them a specific load and moving through ranges of motion and things like that. Friday game, and then Saturday again might be on the road, might be at home. So you have to be creative, right?
Sure.
Because sometimes don't know what equipment you have, so you can only imagine. But we usually
where do you guys lift? Like on the road? Is it the opponent's gym, or do you find I don't know. I'm just curious.
Usually, like the visiting strength coaches are great. So I am very grateful for our ACC strength coaches, at least for, it's kind of like help me help you, especially because, like baseball lifts a lot on the road, and now volleyball and sometimes even like a basketball, let's say someone wants to get in and get a lift. But yeah, usually everyone's very helpful of letting us get in, or if for some reason they're not around on a Saturday, I'll be like, hey, can you leave me some kettlebells, some med balls, some bands? Like, that's why sometimes I got to get creative, and some dumbbells for me to get a lift in. That usually doesn't happen because people are around a lot of the time. And luckily I do travel with the team. So like I'm certified, I'm there on the road. So as long as they just let me in,
Sure.
we'll make sure we clean up everything. But yeah, that in-between day, Saturday is more of like our CNS primer recharge type day. So yeah, like a speed clean, maybe a box jump or like accelerated jump, like a band assisted pogo or something like that. So yeah,
cool.
It's kind of the lay of the land.
Awesome. That's good stuff. Well, the last part here that I usually ask 2 questions. Number one, and don't make it long. You don't have to make it long-winded, but like, what's one thing you've changed your mind on over the course of your career?
Yeah.
Kind of put you on the spot. I should have prepared you for this.
No, you're good. I think younger Stephanie Mock, and now Stephanie Grubbs, right? Like, I felt as if like it was almost like a competition for the performance team of like, how do we make S&C most important? Like to the head coach. Like I want the head coach to lean into me. You see that a lot with football, right? Like the first person they hire the performance team is the head strength coach. They hire their DC, OC, head strength coach, boom. So I think like I always wanted to really show my worth as a younger strength coach of like, I want the head coach to value me. I want to be in all the conversations. Like I want to be most important of a performance team member, like more important than the AT or the dietitian or whatever it may be, and that was probably, I'm just very competitive. So I was like, how can I show value? And now I've become a little bit more aware and zoomed out, probably my leadership role, that it's so important to respect like what your athletic trainer is doing, what your physical therapist is doing, taking interest in what they're doing and asking questions and like learning about their area. Clearly, S&C and sports science have always like meshed well from a performance team standpoint, but you want what's best for your student athlete or your professional athlete or your high school athlete of, we have all these resources, it's my job. And I think I've seen it with sports science, like it's the one that kind of brings all that data together to help make the best decisions. So I think sports science has done a really good job of kind of like the AMS is in the middle, whether it's Rock Daisy or you just use something else. And then you're bringing in all that info, create some type of graphic or some type of report to kind of send out to everybody to make the best decision, So I think as I've gotten further along in my career, I've taken more interest. Like I've spoken at a couple like sports med or surgeon type conferences, and trying to get myself uncomfortable and inserting myself into new places of like, hey, this is what we're doing for return to play, like in a specifically sports performance standpoint. But then I'm sitting in a room and a surgeon's talking about like, am I doing a patella graft or a hamstring graft or an ACL? And I'm like, oh, okay, like let's backtrack. Like I get them at this stage usually. Now I'm hearing about all the stages before. So I think it's really important, whether you're a strength coach or a sports scientist, to like learn and become as dangerous as you can, like in the other areas of expertise too. And it goes a long way of just like showing you have mutual respect. It's not a competition of like, hey, I want S&C to be at the top and everyone else at the bottom of the pyramid. It's literally like I said, sports science sometimes lives in the middle because they collect all the data and then you're trying to make the best decision for sure. So yeah, try to get better.
I can 100% relate to that of a young coach just trying to prove like, hey, I belong here. Let me show you I belong here, rather than saying, hey, I'm not bigger than the whole thing. But I'm an important cog, but I'm not bigger than the important thing. But my interest is in all of us doing what the system is supposed to do, or what our program is supposed to do. So I fully relate with that. The second question I have now is just super simple. What are you reading, or like what's scratching the itch of your brain right now of like, this is really interesting topic for me right now that I'm like looking at, researching, or trying to learn more about?
Yeah, this is probably great to go off of the last question because, I'm always trying to become a wealth of knowledge, like in as many areas as possible. So I recently bought the Quadrant Nutrition book that Daniel Bibb just put out. Yeah. So I was like, man, I feel like a lot of the time I'm helping with whether it's handing out like Cherry Bundy drinks after a late game to help with recovery and with sleep. But I recently got that book, so I'm excited to get it in the mail. It should be coming very soon. I pre-ordered it. And then with Dr. Tim Circumel coming here, I was talking with him. We had dinner when he first got hired and super excited just about like, what we're going to build. And he challenged me. He's like, so what are you reading right now? And like kind of similar to this question. And he's like, but what are you reading like for you? Not just specifically to the field. And I was like, Tim, that's a great question. So I actually have the book here because I've been reading it a lot. It's called What If?
Okay.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
But it's serious scientific answers to absurd hypothetical questions. So
whoa, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, opens your brain up to thinking in a different way. Because as sports scientists, like it's still a little bit related, right? Like we're getting asked questions or we're asking questions, whether it's to the student or they're asking us as their mentors. And it helps with that like thought process of like, all right, they ask the question, what are steps that I kind of go through to get the answer? Or if I don't know the answer, how am I going to find it? So I think, What If? It's been really, really like interesting to kind of open up my thought bubbles and get the wheels turning. So I think when you're asking, like whether it's other colleagues, it's like, what are you reading like relative to the field of performance, but also what are you reading like to challenge yourself outside of that as well? So I think or like listening to podcast wise too. So yeah, great question.
Good point. Awesome. Well, Coach, I really appreciate you coming on. This was an awesome conversation. We get a lot of value out of it. If a coach or sports scientist happens to listen to this and wants to maybe ask you a deeper question on something you talked about, how would you prefer them reach out to you?
Yeah, they can reach out to me on email. So it's really easy, smock@athletics.pitt.edu, and we can put it somewhere where they can find it. And then also at Coach Steph Mock Grubbs for Twitter and for Instagram. Pretty easy to find. So, boom.
Well, good deal. Well, I'll let you go, Coach, and I appreciate you coming on.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me on, Cody.